What happens when the man who has everything risks it all for a secret he can't control? We're talking about Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, whose life looked like a modern fairy tale. A penthouse overlooking the city, a company changing the world, and a beautiful pregnant wife, Amelia, by his side. Tonight was his crowning achievement, the Croft Foundation Gala, a night to celebrate family legacy and charity. But in the glittering crowd, a secret was hiding in plain sight. A secret affair. He thought he had it all managed, all compartmentalized. He was wrong, because the guest of honor, a surprise to everyone, including him, was about to walk on that stage and expose a lie so devastating it would bring his entire empire crashing down. Julian Croft lived a life curated for magazine covers. His days were a symphony of calculated success, conducted from a corner office on the 80th floor of the Croft Tower, a gleaming shard of glass and steel that pierced the New York City skyline. He was the visionary behind Nexus, a revolutionary AI platform that had seamlessly integrated into the fabric of modern life, making him not just wealthy, but culturally significant. At 38, he possessed a sharp intelligence, a disarming smile, and a charisma so potent it could bend rooms to his will. His personal life was the final, perfect brushstroke on his masterpiece of a public image. He was married to Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. The name itself was a legacy. Amelia was not just a billionaire's wife. She was the heiress to an old money dynasty, a woman of quiet grace, formidable intellect, and timeless beauty. Their union was seen as the perfect merger of new tech royalty and established American aristocracy. For the past 5 years, their life had been a whirlwind of galas, board meetings, and exclusive holidays in St. Bart's. Yet beneath the polished veneer, tiny hairline cracks had begun to form. They were almost imperceptible, visible only to those who knew where to look. The silences during their drives back from events had grown longer. Julian's hand, which once rested naturally on the small of her back, now felt like a formal, practiced gesture. The most profound change, the event that should have bonded them closer than ever, had ironically widened the chasm Amelia's pregnancy. After years of heartbreaking struggle of quiet tears and clinical procedures, they were finally expecting a son. It was a miracle they had both prayed for. Julian had been ecstatic, making a public announcement that sent Croft Industries stock soaring on the wave of good PR. He commissioned a state-of-the-art nursery and spoke effusively in interviews about the next chapter and his greatest legacy. But in private, a strange distance had settled in. He became more absorbed in his work than ever before. "It's for the baby more," he'd say, kissing her forehead, before disappearing into his home office for hours. "I'm building an empire for him." He missed prenatal appointments, citing unbreakable meetings with Tokyo or Zurich. He was physically present in their sprawling penthouse, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, his phone a fortress he guarded with a sudden uncharacteristic jealousy. Amelia felt the shift in the very air she breathed. The warmth had been replaced by a polite, sterile chill. She was 7 months pregnant, her body changing in ways that were both miraculous and terrifying, and she had never felt more alone. Her high-risk pregnancy required her to be careful to reduce stress, but a low-grade anxiety had become her constant companion. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface of her serene composure, a feeling that she was living with a beautifully crafted hologram of the man she had married. Meanwhile, at Croft Tower, another life was playing out. Isabella Rossi was the company's senior vice president of global marketing. She was everything Amelia wasn't: sharp-edged, ferociously ambitious, with a fiery energy that matched Julian's own. She had clawed her way up from nothing, and her hunger for success was palpable. She understood Julian's drive, his restlessness, his need to conquer. She spoke his language of market shares and hostile takeovers of risk and reward. Their professional collaboration was electric, producing the company's most successful campaigns. But late-night strategy sessions fueled by expensive whiskey and the intoxicating thrill of shared ambition had bled into something more. It started with a lingering touch over a blueprint, a shared glance that held for a second too long a text message that was professional on the surface but hummed with a dangerous subtext. Isabella knew about Amelia. She had seen the society photos, the perfect couple smiling for the cameras. In her mind, Amelia was a relic, a beautiful but outdated accessory to a man like Julian. She believed Julian when he spoke of a marriage that was more of a business arrangement than a romance, a duty he felt bound to. "It's complicated, Bella." He would murmur, his head in her lap, in the sleek, minimalist apartment he kept under a corporate pseudonym in Soho. "We haven't been truly together in years. The baby. It was our last attempt, but it didn't fix what was already broken." He sold her a story of a gilded cage, and she, wanting to believe it, bought every word. She saw herself as his future, the true partner for the man he was, now not the boy who had married into a legacy. Julian, a master of compartmentalization, believed he could manage it all. He loved the stability and class Amelia provided, the perfect image of home and family. But he craved the fire and validation he found with Isabella. He thought he could have both worlds existing on separate parallel tracks that would never intersect. The stage for their collision was being meticulously set. The annual Croft Foundation Gala was just a week away. This year's theme was Building Legacies, a charity event to launch a new national initiative for underprivileged families. It was Julian's magnum opus of philanthropy, designed to cement his image as a benevolent titan of industry. He would give the keynote speech. Isabella, as the marketing genius behind the event, would be there watching from a key table. And Amelia, his beautiful pregnant wife, was expected to be on his arm, the serene Madonna, to his benevolent king. Julian had the script for the evening perfectly planned. He just didn't realize he was no longer the one directing the play. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in Julian's duplicity. He was a man playing two intensely demanding roles, and the strain was beginning to show, though only in the minutest of ways. To the world, he was the devoted husband and expectant father. He was photographed leaving a high-end baby boutique bags in hand with a quote for the paparazzi about nesting. He approved the final seating chart for the gala, placing Amelia at the center of the head table, a place of honor. To Amelia, he was solicitously distant. "Are you feeling all right, Mia? The doctors said you need to rest," he'd say, his concern sounding more like a directive. He bought her a stunning sapphire necklace to wear at the gala, the Croft Blue, the media would later call it. He laid it in its velvet box on her vanity, a beautiful, cold and silent apology for absences he never explained. Amelia accepted the gift with a quiet, gracious smile that no longer reached her eyes. Her suspicions had moved past intuition and into a realm of painful certainty. The catalyst hadn't been a single dramatic discovery, but a slow, agonizing accumulation of evidence. A credit card statement he'd left on his desk, showing charges for a florist near Isabella Rossi's apartment for restaurants Amelia had never been to. A whispered phone call he thought she couldn't hear his voice, dropping to an intimate, urgent tone she hadn't heard directed at her in years. "Not now, Bella. I'll see you tonight. Yes, I promise." The final, brutal confirmation came from a simple, forgotten item, his secondary tablet, the one he used for work drafts. He'd left it on the nightstand, and in a moment of weakness that she would later see as strength, she opened it. He hadn't even bothered to password protect it. There it was. A thread of messages, hundreds of them, photos, plans for a future that didn't include her, promises of a life together after the timing was right. The most cutting messages were about her. Julian, she's just so fragile right now. I can't add any stress. Isabella, I know my love. But when do I get all of you, Julian? Soon. After the baby is born, after the gala, I promise you, this life with her. It's a photograph. You and I are the real thing. Amelia sat on their perfectly made bed, the cold screen of the tablet illuminating the silent tears tracking down her face. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. Every shared memory, every vow, every tender moment from their past felt instantly corrupted, rewritten as a lie. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was humiliated. He had painted her as a weak, fragile thing to be managed, a problem to be solved, before he could move on to his real life. For a full day she was paralyzed by grief. She stayed in her room claiming she felt unwell, which wasn't a lie. Her soul was sick. The urge to confront him, to scream and throw the tablet at his head was a burning fever in her veins. But as the hours passed, the consuming fire of her rage cooled into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous resolve. She was a Vanderbilt. Her ancestors hadn't built their fortunes by shattering in the face of betrayal. They had rebuilt, strategized, and conquered. Crying in her bedroom would give him the satisfaction of her weakness. A messy private confrontation would allow him to control the narrative, to gaslight her, to paint her as the hysterical, pregnant wife. He had made this a public humiliation in private. She would return the favor. She would not be a footnote in her own life, the fragile wife left behind. She would be the architect of his reckoning. Her plan began to form, elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. She knew the Croft Foundation was Julian's proudest achievement, the source of his carefully manufactured public virtue, and she knew that she, as his wife, had a significant, if often ceremonial role within it. Her family had been one of the foundation's initial seed investors. Legally, she held more power than Julian realized. She made a call to Daniel Levine, the gala's event coordinator, and a man whose career her family had helped launch years ago. "Daniel, darling," she said, her voice smooth as silk, betraying none of the turmoil within. "I have a small surprise I'd like to arrange for Julian on the night of the gala. A tribute of sorts. It needs to be kept in the strictest confidence. I want to be introduced as the evening's special guest of honor." Daniel was taken aback, but the request came with an authority he couldn't question. "Of course, Mrs. Croft, but Mr. Croft has already approved the program." "And now I am amending it," Amelia stated, a new steel in her voice. "There's also the matter of the Foundation's annual legacy gift. I'll be announcing it myself this year. Please ensure the teleprompter is loaded with a speech I'll be sending over to you on the day. And Daniel, your absolute discretion is paramount." Next, she met with her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, a formidable man with a hawk's gaze and an empire of his own. She laid out the truth, her voice steady, presenting the evidence without tears. She didn't ask for his help. She outlined her strategy and asked for his support. He listened in stony silence, his fury at Julian, a palpable force in the room. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "He has underestimated you, Amelia. He has underestimated our family. You will have everything you need." In the final days before the gala, Amelia became the perfect actress. She discussed the seating chart with Julian, feigned excitement about his speech, and allowed him to fuss over her dress. She was a vision of placid serenity. She was letting him walk into a perfectly constructed trap, baited with his own ego. He saw her as a beautiful pregnant figurehead for his perfect life. He had no idea she was a weapon, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. While he was busy managing his affair, Amelia was busy seizing control of the board, leveraging her family's influence, and preparing the speech that would burn his world to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a breathtaking spectacle of corporate opulence. A constellation of crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of New York's elite. The air buzzed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the subtle scent of money and perfume. This was Julian Croft's court, and tonight he was its undisputed king. He stood near the entrance, a vision of tailored perfection in a Tom Ford tuxedo. Amelia was on his arm, radiating a serene, ethereal beauty in a custom Dior gown of deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over her 7-month baby bump. The Croft blue necklace rested against her collarbone, its cold weight a constant reminder of her purpose. She smiled, she nodded. She accepted congratulations on the baby with a grace that felt almost otherworldly. To any observer, they were the picture of power and happiness. Julian was in his element. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, shaking hands with tech rivals, clapping politicians on the back, and charming the society columnists who documented his every move. His eyes, however, kept scanning the room, a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of his gaze. He was looking for Isabella. He found her holding court near the bar, looking stunning in a crimson, backless dress that was both elegant and audacious. She was a slash of vibrant color in a room of muted blacks and metallics. Their eyes met for a fleeting electric moment across the crowded room. It was a look of shared conspiracy of triumph. She raised her glass in a tiny, almost invisible salute. "Our night," the gesture said. Julian squeezed Amelia's arm gently. "I need to go and greet Senator Thompson." He murmured, his voice a perfect blend of duty and affection. "Don't tire yourself out, my love. I'll be right back." Amelia watched him go, her serene smile never wavering. She saw the path he took, a masterfully indirect route that ended for a few precious hidden seconds near the alcove where Isabella was standing. She saw the brief, illicit touch of his hand on Isabella's arm, the whispered word she couldn't hear, but could feel in her bones. The betrayal was so brazen, so confident, it almost took her breath away. But she held her ground, a marble statue in the midst of a swirling party, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. This was not just for her. It was for the son he had used as a shield for his lies. She was approached by Margaret Davies, a sharp-eyed journalist from Forbes. "Amelia, you look absolutely radiant," Margaret gushed. "This initiative for families is so inspiring. Julian is a true visionary." "He certainly has a talent for building things," Amelia replied, her voice smooth and even. The double meaning hung in the air, unnoticed by the journalist. But legacy isn't just about what you build. It's about the foundation it's built upon, integrity, honesty. That's what truly lasts. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the formal program. Guests drifted towards their tables, the buzz of conversation softening to an expectant hush. Julian returned to Amelia's side, his face flushed with excitement and power. "Showtime," he whispered, giving her hand a squeeze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw only what he wanted to see, his beautiful pregnant wife, the perfect symbol for a night dedicated to family. They took their seats at the head table. Julian was center stage with Amelia to his right. A few seats down at the adjacent table, reserved for top executives, sat Isabella Rossi. Her vantage point was perfect. She could watch Julian as he delivered his speech, a speech she had helped him write, full of words like, commitment, future, and trust. She felt a thrill of ownership, of being the secret partner in his triumph. The evening's master of ceremonies, a well-known news anchor, took the stage. He welcomed the guests, spoke of the Foundation's incredible work, and then began the introductions. And of course, the man who makes it all possible, a titan of innovation and a true philanthropist, the founder and chairman of Croft Industries, Mr. Julian Croft. A wave of thunderous applause filled the room. Julian stood basking in it, a wide, confident smile spreading across his face. He nodded to the crowd, the picture of a benevolent leader. He sat down, leaning over to Amelia. "Nervous?" he asked, a hint of patronizing charm in his voice. "Not at all," she said, her voice a calm, clear bell. "I feel remarkably centered." The MC continued, his voice booming through the sound system. "This year we wanted to do something a little different. Before our keynote address from Julian, we want to pay tribute to the silent partner in this incredible journey, the heart and soul that inspires the work we do here. It is my distinct honor to introduce a surprise special guest, our true guest of honor tonight." Julian shifted in his seat, a flicker of curiosity on his face. He had approved every detail of the program. There was no surprise guest. He glanced at his chief of staff, who looked just as bewildered. Isabella frowned, a wrinkle of confusion marring her perfect brow. This wasn't in the script. The MC paused for dramatic effect, a wide smile on his face. The entire room was rapt with attention. A woman of immense grace, strength, and a founding patron of this very foundation. Please join me in giving a standing ovation to Mrs. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. The name echoed through the grand ballroom, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. For a single silent moment, the universe seemed to halt. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room, leaving a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. And in that vacuum, Julian Croft's perfectly constructed world shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale mask of disbelief. His charming smile froze, then collapsed. He turned to Amelia, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into panic. She was already rising, her movements fluid and deliberate. She met his gaze, and for the first time that night, perhaps in years, he saw her. He didn't see the placid, gentle wife. He saw a stranger, a woman with eyes of glacial ice, holding a resolve so absolute it terrified him. There was no love there, no warmth, only judgment. The applause started slowly, a ripple of confusion from the guests, then swelled into a tidal wave as they rose to their feet. They were applauding the narrative, the supportive wife being honored by her loving husband, the beautiful pregnant matriarch of the Croft dynasty. They had no idea they were applauding an executioner walking towards the scaffold. From her table, Isabella Rossi watched the scene unfold with a dawning horror. This was impossible. Amelia was supposed to be a prop, a beautiful piece of scenery. She was not supposed to be the main event. Isabella looked at Julian, seeking some sign, some explanation, but he was a statue, his eyes locked on his wife's ascending form. In that moment, a cold dread snaked its way into Isabella's heart. She felt a fundamental shift in power, a game she didn't know she was playing, being lost in spectacular fashion. Amelia moved towards the stage with a poise that defied the tremor in her hands, a tremor no one but she could feel. Her hand rested on her baby bump, a gesture that now seemed less about maternal affection and more like a warrior shielding their sigil. She ascended the small set of stairs, the spotlight following her, catching the fire in the Croft blue sapphires at her throat. They looked like chips of ice. She reached the podium and turned to face the crowd. The applause slowly died down, replaced by a dense, expectant silence. Hundreds of faces, a gallery of the most powerful people in the city, were turned towards her. She took a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room. She saw her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, in the front row, his face an unreadable mask of grim support. She saw the confused faces of Julian's board members, and she saw Isabella, her crimson dress, now looking like a raw, open wound, her face a portrait of utter bewilderment. Finally, her eyes landed on her husband. Julian was still half standing, caught between sitting and rising his face, a maelstrom of emotions, panic, fear, and a dawning, sickening understanding. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was a trap door and the lever had just been pulled. The MC, oblivious to the undercurrents of an impending catastrophe, beamed at her. "Mrs. Croft, the stage is yours." Amelia leaned towards the microphone. The soft click as it activated was like the cocking of a hammer. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, and when she spoke, her voice was not the soft, gentle tone everyone expected. It was clear, measured, and imbued with an unshakable, devastating authority. "Thank you," she began, the two simple words carrying an impossible weight. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Croft Foundation." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "My husband, Julian, is a builder. He builds companies. He builds technologies. He builds a vision for the future. Tonight we are here to celebrate the building of legacies. But a legacy is not a skyscraper. It cannot be built on a faulty foundation. It cannot be sustained by a beautiful facade that conceals a rotten core. A true legacy, a true family, must be built on the bedrock of one thing: trust." The word trust hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at the head table. Julian flinched, as if he'd been physically struck. Whispers began to ripple through the ballroom. This was not the expected thank you speech. This was something else entirely. Amelia had everyone's complete and undivided attention. She was no longer just the wife. She was the main event, and the show was just beginning. Amelia gripped the sides of the sleek wooden podium, her knuckles white. The spotlight was hot on her face, but she felt a chilling calm settle over her. This was the moment of impact, the culmination of a week of silent, methodical preparation. "Trust," she repeated, her voice resonating with a newfound power. "It is the invisible architecture of everything we hold dear. Our partnerships, our families, our businesses. Without it, the most impressive structures eventually crumble to dust. They become hollow monuments to what could have been." She let her gaze drift over the audience before it settled with surgical precision back on Julian. His face was ashen. He looked trapped, a king suddenly finding himself in a cage of his own making, with all his courtiers watching. "I have been a silent partner in the Croft Foundation since its inception." Amelia continued, her voice unwavering. "My family's name and resources were some of the first to cede its promise. We did so because we believed in its mission to support families, to provide stability, security, and a safe harbor for those facing hardship. To build homes, not just houses." She took a sip of water, a deliberate, theatrical pause that drew the tension in the room to a breaking point. The whispers had died down, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. Every phone in the room was now discreetly recording. "But in recent months, I have been forced to reconsider what it means to be a silent partner. Silence can be misconstrued. It can be mistaken for complicity, for ignorance, for weakness." She looked away from Julian and towards the section where the board members were seated. A foundation like a marriage is a vow. It's a public promise of integrity. When that promise is broken in private, the public facade becomes a lie. And I will not, for the sake of appearances, lend my name, my family's name, or my child's future name to a lie. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was no longer subtext. It was a declaration of war. Isabella Rossi felt the blood rush to her head. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. The eyes of those at her table were flicking towards her, the whispers now containing her name. Her association with Julian, once a source of pride and power, had just become a career-ending liability. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Amelia's voice dropped, becoming more intimate, more personal, drawing the audience in even closer. Tonight's theme is building legacies. I have been thinking a great deal about the legacy I want to build for my son. Her hand went to her belly. He will learn that wealth is not a measure of a man's worth. He will learn that true strength lies not in power but in character. He will learn that honesty is not a strategy, but a core principle. And he will learn that you cannot claim to support the sanctity of the family in a grand ballroom while you desecrate your own at home. The final sentence landed like a guillotine. The insinuation was so clear, so brutally direct, that no one could misinterpret it. The cameras which had been focused on Amelia now swiveled towards Julian, the lenses hungry for his reaction. He looked utterly broken, his public mask of charisma and control stripped away, revealing the panicked, guilty man beneath. And so, Amelia announced her voice, rising again with command. I am taking a more active role in this foundation, starting tonight. As a gesture of my renewed commitment, a commitment to true integrity, I am making a personal contribution. It is my understanding that the legacy gift for this evening was to be a $1 million pledge from the corporate fund. She paused. I find that insufficient. She looked directly at her father, who gave a single sharp nod. Tonight I am personally pledging $50 million from the Vanderbilt Trust. The room erupted in gasps and applause, a wave of shock and excitement. To a new initiative. Amelia continued, speaking over the noise, her voice cutting through it all. This initiative will be managed by me, and it will be dedicated exclusively to building and funding women's shelters and providing legal aid for women and children leaving toxic and deceitful domestic environments. It was a masterstroke. She hadn't just exposed him. She had seized his philanthropic narrative, repurposed his foundation, and funded it with her own money, all in one devastating move. She had publicly branded him a liar and a cheat without ever using those words, and then positioned herself as the savior of the very women he had created. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces one last time. Thank you, she said with a finality that was absolute. Enjoy your evening. And with that she turned, not looking back at the wreckage she had wrought, and walked off the stage. Her personal security men, loyal to her father and prearranged, moved swiftly to her side, forming a protective barrier. The gala was in chaos. The night was over. Julian Croft's reign had ended. The moment Amelia stepped off the stage, the carefully orchestrated elegance of the gala disintegrated into chaos. The stunned silence was shattered by an explosion of frantic murmuring that grew into a deafening roar. Guests were on their feet, not in applause, but in a frenzy of gossip and disbelief. Phones were held aloft not to capture a memory, but to send out the bombshell news to the world. The hashtag Lasha Croft Gala was already trending, fueled by a torrent of grainy videos and speculative tweets. Julian remained frozen at the head table, the spotlight that had once been his friend, now feeling like an interrogation lamp. The applause for Amelia's $50 million pledge had been genuine, but it was aimed at her, a celebration of her power play, not a commendation of his foundation. To them, he was now the villain in her story. He saw it in the eyes of his board members who were pointedly avoiding his gaze, instead locked in hushed, panicked conversations. He saw it in the faces of his business rivals who wore expressions of poorly concealed glee. His first instinct was to go to Amelia, to fix it, to control it. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor, and moved to intercept her. But her exit was a perfectly executed maneuver. 2 imposing security guards, men he didn't recognize, flanked her instantly. Her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, met her at the bottom of the stage stairs, placing a protective arm around her. They formed an impenetrable unit, sweeping through the parting crowd towards a private exit, ignoring the cacophony of questions being shouted by the press. "Amelia!" Julian called out, his voice hoarse. It was lost in the din. She didn't turn. She didn't even hesitate. It was as if he no longer existed. His second instinct was to find Isabella. He scanned the room, his eyes wild with desperation. He spotted her, a lone figure in a sea of chaos. She was trying to make a quiet exit, but Margaret Davies, the Forbes journalist, had cornered her. Julian could see the predatory gleam in the reporter's eyes, the pointed questions being fired at a pale and shaken Isabella. Her career, which had been hitched so tightly to his, was now in a nosedive, and she was the most obvious target for the media's hunger for a name. He had made her complicit, and now she was paying the price. A hand clamped down on Julian's shoulder. It was Marcus Thorne, the oldest and most influential member of the Croft Industries board. His face, usually jovial, was a grim mask of fury. "Fix this, Julian," Marcus hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You have until the market opens on Monday. A statement, a retraction, something. You have endangered this entire company with your mess." He didn't wait for a reply, turning his back on Julian in a gesture of ultimate dismissal. The ballroom felt like it was closing in on him. The flashes of the cameras were like small explosions, disorienting and relentless. He had to get out. Stumbling through the throng, he ignored the shouted questions and the sympathetic, pitying looks, which were somehow worse than the scornful ones. He made it to the service exit and burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath like a drowning man. His driver was waiting with the Rolls-Royce, his face impassive. "The penthouse, Mr. Croft." "Yes." Julian croaked, his throat dry. The drive through the glittering streets of Manhattan was a silent tour of his downfall. The city lights, once a symbol of his triumph, now seemed to mock him. He pulled out his phone. It was a wildfire of notifications, hundreds of missed calls, thousands of text messages and emails. The first alerts from major news outlets were already popping up. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft stuns at gala pledges, 50 minutos to women's shelters, in scathing rebuke of husband Julian Croft. Chaos at Croft Foundation. Gala what was behind. Amelia Croft's shocking speech. Croft Industries, stock futures plummet in after-hours trading, following gala drama. He tried calling Amelia. It went straight to a number that was no longer in service. He had been cut off. He called her father, Arthur. It rang once, then disconnected. Blocked. When he arrived at the penthouse, it was a cavern of silence. The air was cold. He walked into their bedroom, his heart pounding, a sickening rhythm against his ribs. The signs of her departure were subtle but absolute. The closet was half empty, her clothes and shoes gone. The jewelry box on her vanity was open empty, save for one item placed dead center, the Croft blue sapphire necklace. A returned gift. A final severing. On the bed where she had likely read the messages that sealed his fate was a single thick envelope. His name was written on the front in her elegant, familiar script. His hands trembled as he tore it open. It contained legal documents, divorce papers filed that very afternoon, and a restraining order citing emotional distress and infidelity, barring him from contacting her or coming within 500 feet of her. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the papers slipping from his numb fingers. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost control. In a single evening, Amelia, the fragile woman he thought he was managing, had outmaneuvered him at every turn. She had taken his power, his reputation, and his son, all while the world watched. He was alone in the silent, opulent tomb he had built for himself, the echoes of her final words ringing in his ears. The legacy he was so proud of was now irrevocably a legacy of lies. The days that followed the gala were a slow, agonizing bleed. The world Julian Croft had commanded was now a hostile territory. The market opened on Monday to a bloodbath. Croft Industries' stock plunged over 30%, wiping out billions in value. The headline story wasn't about their cutting-edge AI anymore. It was about the sordid details of the CEO's personal life. The board convened an emergency meeting from which Julian was pointedly excluded. By noon they had issued a public statement. Julian Croft was taking an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. His empire had been taken from him while he was locked out of the building. His attempts to fight back were futile. Amelia and the Vanderbilts had been preparing for this war long before he knew it had been declared. His best lawyers were met with a legal firewall so thick it was impenetrable. Every asset, every account, every part of his life that was intertwined with Amelia's was frozen, locked down, or already under her control. The prenuptial agreement, which he had always considered ironclad, had an infidelity clause he'd long forgotten, a clause so punitive it would strip him of a vast portion of his marital assets. It had been Amelia's father's sole insisted-upon term. Desperate and isolated, Julian finally did what he should have done. A week ago he went to the Soho apartment. He needed to see Isabella, the one person he thought was still on his side. He found her packing boxes, her face pale and drawn, her fiery energy extinguished. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hollow. Isabella didn't look at him. She just kept throwing clothes and books haphazardly into a box. "I was fired," she said, her voice flat and brittle. "An email this morning, effective immediately. Morality clause. They even had security escort me from my office like a common criminal." "Bella, I'm sorry," he began. "Sorry." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a venomous rage that startled him. "You're sorry. You told me she was fragile. You told me the marriage was a business arrangement. You sold me a story Julian and I was stupid enough to build my future on it." She threw a book into the box with such force that the corners crumpled. "Did you ever intend to leave her? Or was I just a convenient, exciting distraction from your perfect life?" "Of course I did," he insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to him. The timing was just complicated. Complicated. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "No, you weren't complicated. You were a coward. You wanted everything. The respectable wife and the adoring mistress. You wanted the legacy and the thrill. And you ended up with nothing. And you dragged me down with you." She sealed the box with a screech of packing tape. "My career is ruined. My name is synonymous with your scandal. I'm the other woman, the homewrecker, while your wife is being hailed as some feminist icon, a hero for scorned women everywhere. She didn't just ruin you, Julian. She destroyed me as an afterthought." He had no answer. She was right. He had seen Isabella not as a person, but as a component of the life he wanted a solution to his own boredom and ego. He had never considered the consequences for her, because he never believed there would be any. "Get out," she whispered, her anger suddenly spent, leaving only a vast, empty exhaustion. "Get out of my apartment, out of my life." He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, another door closed to a life that no longer existed. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own creation. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum of his failures. The city that had once bowed to him now felt like a cage. Months later, a semblance of a new reality began to emerge from the rubble. The divorce was finalized in a quiet, brutal settlement that favored Amelia entirely. She had given birth to a son, Arthur Vanderbilt, a name that pointedly erased the Croft lineage. News articles showed her serene and strong, spearheading her new foundation, which was already opening shelters across the country. She had not only survived, she had transformed her pain into a purpose, becoming a powerful advocate and a symbol of resilience. She had taken his betrayal and built a better legacy from it. Julian was a recluse. He had kept a fraction of his fortune enough to live in luxury forever, but his name was poison in the tech world and in society. His comeback attempts were met with derision. He was a cautionary tale told in boardrooms and business schools. One evening he saw a picture online. It was from a charity event. Amelia was holding her son. She was smiling a genuine, radiant smile he hadn't seen on her face in years. The boy had her eyes. In that moment, staring at the screen, Julian finally understood the full scope of what he had lost. It wasn't just the company, the money, or the reputation. He had lost a family. He had traded a foundation of trust for a thrilling facade, and just as she had predicted, on that fateful night, his entire world had crumbled to dust. He had built an empire, but in the end, he had no legacy at all. 5 years is a lifetime. For Julian Croft, it had been a purgatory. The inferno of his public immolation had long since cooled, leaving behind a quiet, desolate landscape. The billions were gone, chewed up by the divorce settlement legal fees and the stock collapse. He lived now in a modest, modern house in Northern California under the name James. It was a life of anonymity he had once craved on his most stressful days, but now found to be a suffocating cloak of his own failure. He ran a small tech consultancy, successful enough to be comfortable but insignificant enough to remain invisible. The ghost of Julian Croft was too toxic to be resurrected. He never remarried. He dated occasionally, but the connections were shallow, hollowed out by the crater of his past. The truth was, his heart had been cauterized on the night of the gala. He had learned a brutal lesson in value, that he had traded something priceless for something worthless, and the debt of that transaction was lifelong. He kept track of her, of course. It was a form of self-flagellation. Amelia Vanderbilt was no longer the Croft. She had shed his name like a contaminated skin. She was now a philanthropic powerhouse, a revered figure on the global stage. Her foundation, the Phoenix Initiative, had become a global benchmark for supporting women and children. She was a regular at Davos and the UN General Assembly, her voice carrying the weight of authentic conviction. In every photo, she radiated a calm, indomitable strength. And then there was Arthur, his son. Julian watched him grow up through the sterile lens of magazine articles and paparazzi photos. He saw a boy with Amelia's graceful features, and he imagined a spark of his own curiosity in his eyes. He knew the boy's favorite color was green, that he loved sailing with his grandfather, and that he had a dog named Captain. He knew these trivial facts because he devoured every scrap of information he could find a father trying to construct a child out of hearsay and pixels. The pain of this distant, one-sided relationship was a constant low-grade ache in his chest. Isabella Rossi had vanished for 3 years, only to re-emerge in Singapore. She had rebranded, founding a successful marketing firm under a new name, her past a carefully buried secret that the international business community seemed willing to overlook. Julian sometimes wondered if she too was haunted. He suspected she was. The breaking point for Julian's quiet exile came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in San Francisco for a meeting and saw them. In a small park overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Amelia was pushing Arthur on a swing. The sight was so mundane, so beautifully normal, it shattered him. The laughter of the son he had never met carried on the wind, a sound more devastating than any shouted accusation. He watched from a distance, a ghost at the edge of his own family's life, until they left. That night he decided he could not live the rest of his life as a spectator. He didn't want his money back. He didn't want his fame. He just wanted his son to know he existed. Through a mutually respected elderly lawyer who had known both families for decades, he requested a meeting with Amelia. He made it clear he would not contest the restraining order which had long since expired, but was asking for a single voluntary conversation, for the sake of Arthur. 2 weeks later, to his profound surprise, she agreed. They met in the neutral territory of the lawyer's empty wood-panelled office. When Amelia walked in, Julian felt the air leave his lungs. She was more formidable than he remembered. The 5 years had stripped away any lingering softness and replaced it with a polished, unyielding poise. There was no anger in her eyes anymore. That fire had been used to forge the woman she was now. What was left was a cool, dispassionate calm that was far more intimidating. "Julian," she said, her voice even. It wasn't a question. "Amelia, thank you for coming," he said, his own voice sounding rough to his ears. They sat at opposite ends of a long mahogany table. For a moment, the silence was absolute. "I didn't ask for this meeting to ask you for anything," he began, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Not for forgiveness, not for a second chance. God knows I don't deserve either. I asked to be here to say what I should have said 5 years ago, without the world watching. I'm sorry. Not for my career or the money. I'm sorry for breaking my vows to you. I'm sorry for the humiliation and the pain I caused. I was a coward and I was a fool. You built a life of meaning on the rubble of what I destroyed, and you have my unending respect and admiration for that." Amelia listened, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer him a comforting nod or a word of absolution. She simply let him speak. "I have a son," Julian continued, his voice cracking slightly. "And he doesn't know I exist. I know that's my fault. I abdicated my right to be his father that night. But he's getting older. He's going to ask questions. I want him to know that he was not abandoned, that he was the product of a love that was real once, and that his father is deeply, profoundly sorry for his failures." He finally finished the confession, leaving him feeling hollowed out. The decision was hers. Amelia was silent for a full minute, her fingers steepled in front of her. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, precise, and final. "I appreciate your apology, Julian," she said. "I believe it's sincere. But an apology doesn't mend what was broken. You speak of trust. I will never, ever trust you again. My life and my son's life is built on a foundation of safety and honesty. You are a risk I will not allow into that foundation." Julian's flicker of hope died. He nodded slowly, accepting it. "I understand." "But," she added, and he looked up, "you are right about one thing. Arthur is not a pawn, and he is not a prize. He is a person, and he deserves the whole truth when he is old enough to understand it. I will not lie to him." She stood up, her presence commanding the room. "When Arthur turns 18, I will give him a letter. In that letter, I will tell him everything. The good from our beginning and the truth of our end. I will also include your contact information, should you wish to provide it. If at that time he chooses to seek you out, it will be his decision alone. I will not stand in his way." She paused at the door. "Until then, you will make no attempt to contact him or me. You will continue to watch from a distance. That is the only legacy you have left with us. A choice that belongs to your son, 13 years from now. Goodbye, Julian." And then she was gone. Julian sat alone in the silent office for a long time. It was not the reconciliation he might have dreamed of in his darkest moments, but it was more than he deserved. It was a sliver of a chance, a seed of a possibility planted in a distant future. It was a reckoning that was not a single fiery event, but a long, quiet, and painful penance. He had been given a date for his potential redemption 13 years from now, and until then, he would wait a ghost in the life of the son he had, and the man he once was. Julian Croft's story is a chilling reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. It's a story about the lies we tell ourselves and the devastating cost of betrayal. He thought he could have two worlds, but ended up losing them both, all because he underestimated the quiet strength of the woman he wronged. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft shows us that from the ashes of heartbreak, it's possible to rise stronger, to reclaim your narrative, and to build a new legacy founded not on a name or a fortune, but on unwavering integrity. Their saga serves as a powerful lesson. The most valuable asset you can ever have is trust, and once it's broken, it's a debt no amount of money can ever repay. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill of betrayal and the fire of retribution, show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves intense, real-life drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We bring you the most compelling stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let us know in the comments, was Amelia's revenge justified? We want to hear from you. Some betrayals are quiet whispers in the dark. Others happen under the blinding glare of 1,000 spotlights. For Jessica Peterson, it was the latter. 7 months pregnant and beaming with pride, she watched her husband, the man she'd sacrificed everything for, step onto a stage to accept the biggest award of his life. But he didn't thank her. Instead, he pulled another woman into the spotlight, calling her his muse, his everything, as the cameras flashed and the audience roared. He laughed, looking right at Jessica, as her world didn't just break it, detonated for the entire world to see. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of what happens when a woman left with nothing but shattered pieces and the baby growing inside her decides to rebuild herself, not into a survivor, but into an empress. The Grand Royale Theatre was a sea of shimmering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous ambition, buzzed with the energy of the annual Golden Iris Film Awards. For Jessica Peterson, it felt like the culmination of a decade of shared dreams. She sat at a prime table near the stage, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her 7-month pregnancy bump. The baby, a boy they'd already decided to name Noah, was a quiet, constant reassurance beneath the soft silk of her emerald gown. Her husband, Daniel Carter, was the man of the hour. His indie film, Echoes of a City, was the sleeper hit of the year, and he was the frontrunner for Best Director. Jessica's heart swelled with a pride that was almost painful. She remembered the lean years, the tiny apartment with peeling paint, the countless bowls of ramen noodles, the part-time jobs she'd worked to support them, while he poured his soul into his scripts. She had been his first reader, his harshest critic, his most fervent believer. She'd typed his final drafts, brewed his coffee at 3 a.m., and whispered words of encouragement when his confidence faltered. His success felt as much hers as it did his. "You look beautiful, Jess," Daniel had said earlier that evening. His eyes, however, seemed to skim over her, already focused on the stage, the cameras, the promise of glory. He was electric, a live wire of anticipation, and she'd chalked up his distance to pre-show jitters. Now the moment was here. The presenter, a seasoned A-list actor, tore open the envelope. And the Golden Iris for Best Director goes to Daniel Carter for Echoes of a City. The room erupted. Jessica gasped, tears instantly welling in her eyes. This was it, everything they had worked for. Daniel shot up from his seat, a triumphant roar escaping his lips. He kissed her a quick, almost forgettable peck on the cheek before striding towards the stage, soaking in the thunderous applause. Jessica watched her hands clasped together, her entire being focused on him. He was handsome, impossibly so, under the brilliant white spotlights. He took the heavy golden statuette, a wide, charismatic grin plastered on his face. "Whoa," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Just, wow, I am speechless." He paused for effect, letting the applause wash over him again. They say no man is an island, and that has never been truer than tonight. A project like this isn't born from one person. It's born from passion, from inspiration, from a fire that someone else lights inside you. Jessica's smile widened. She braced herself for her name, for the public acknowledgement of her sacrifice and love. Daniel scanned the audience, and his eyes seemed to look right past her. "There is one person I need to thank. Someone who came into my life like a comet and showed me what true art, what true passion really is. She's the soul of this film. My muse, my inspiration, my everything." Jessica's brow furrowed in confusion. A muse, he'd always said she was his muse. Daniel's gaze locked onto a table a few rows back. "Tiffany, darling, get up here." A stunned silence rippled through the immediate vicinity before being swallowed by the general din. Jessica's head whipped around. She saw a woman rise from her seat, Tiffany Monroe, the film's lead actress. She was a vision in a skin-tight crimson dress, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face as she glided towards the stage, every step a calculated performance. Jessica's blood ran cold. Tiffany, the actress Daniel had sworn was just a colleague, the late-night editing sessions and the unexplained credit card charges suddenly coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. The air was sucked from her lungs. Daniel didn't just invite Tiffany onto the stage. He pulled her into his arms, dipping her into a dramatic movie-style kiss as the cameras flashed relentlessly. The crowd, assuming this was part of the show, a confirmation of a hot new industry romance, began to whoop and cheer. But Daniel wasn't finished. With Tiffany on his arm, he looked out into the audience, his eyes finally finding Jessica's. There was no apology in his gaze, no regret. There was only a cold, dismissive smirk. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that sliced her open. "To my muse, Tiffany," he said, raising the award. "And to new beginnings." He didn't need to say the rest. The message was clear. The entire room, or at least those close enough to see her, turned to look at the very pregnant, very publicly discarded wife. The whispers started a venomous hiss that slithered through the applause. The pitying stares felt like physical blows. Her emerald dress, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a shroud of humiliation. The baby inside her gave a small, nervous flutter, as if he could sense his mother's world imploding. Her face was a frozen mask of shock, but inside, a silent scream was tearing her apart. Time seemed to warp and stretch. The walk from the table to the exit was the longest journey of her life. Each step was a monumental effort, her legs trembling, her vision blurred by unshed tears. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes tracking her, the pregnant wife, the fool, the discarded relic of his past. The laughter and applause from the auditorium sounded mocking, a cruel soundtrack to her utter devastation. She stumbled out into the cool night air, the chaotic noise of the Los Angeles streets, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence in her heart. She hailed a taxi, her voice a broken whisper. As the car pulled away from the curb, she glanced back at the theater, its glittering facade now looking like the entrance to a nightmare. She arrived back at their shared house. His house now, she supposed. It felt alien, contaminated. His clothes were in the closet, his scent on the pillows. She moved through the rooms in a daze, a ghost in her own life. There was no grand scene, no dramatic packing of bags. She simply took her purse, the worn leather wallet containing the last $47 to her name, and her car keys. She didn't take the clothes Daniel had bought her, or the jewelry, or the photos of them smiling. They were all props from a life that had been a lie. Driving away from the house, with no destination in mind, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. She was 28 years old, 7 months pregnant, homeless and utterly alone. The man she had built her world around had not just left her. He had gleefully demolished her on a public stage, laughing as the walls caved in. The tears finally came, hot, silent trails of betrayal and despair as she drove into the endless, unforgiving night. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels and crushing despair. The $47 vanished in 2 days on gas and a stale sandwich. Jessica sold her car, a modest sedan they'd bought together, for a pittance. That money, a few $1,000s, became her lifeline, a dwindling buffer against the harsh reality of the streets. She found a room in a boarding house in a forgotten part of the city, where the walls were paper-thin and the permanent smell of boiled cabbage hung in the air. The shame was a constant, suffocating companion. Every time she saw a newspaper or a magazine at a checkout stand, she'd see their faces, Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe. Hollywood's new golden couple, smiling, kissing, celebrating. The articles painted him as a genius, a passionate artist swept up in an epic romance. They never mentioned the pregnant wife he'd left in the wreckage. To the world, she had been erased. Loneliness was a physical ache. She had alienated some of her own friends over the years, prioritizing Daniel's career over her own relationships. Her parents were gone, lost in a car accident 5 years prior. She had no one. The baby was her only reason to get out of bed in the morning. She would talk to him, her hands cradling her belly, promising him a better life, a promise that felt more like a desperate prayer with each passing day. She tried to find work, but who wanted to hire a heavily pregnant woman with no recent job experience for a short-term gig? The interviews were a series of polite rejections and thinly veiled pity. Her savings dwindled with terrifying speed. One evening, after paying the weekly rent for her dismal room, she counted the remaining cash. $89. $89 to last until the baby came and beyond. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She sat on the lumpy mattress, the bare bulb overhead, casting harsh shadows on the peeling wallpaper. This was it. This was rock bottom. The despair was so profound, it felt like drowning. She thought about giving up, about the darkness that promised an end to the pain. But then a tiny, insistent kick from within her womb. A flutter of life. Noah. He was real and he was depending on her. She couldn't fail him. Her mind, frantic for a solution, began to race through the tattered remnants of her old life. There had to be someone, something. And then a name surfaced from the depths of her memory, a name she hadn't thought of in years, Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch had been her father's best friend in college, a brilliant but reclusive man who had made a fortune in the early days of tech. After her parents' death, he had sent a brief, formal condolence letter with a business card attached. If you ever find yourself in true need, the handwritten note had said, "Use this number." Your father was a good man. At the time, grieving and trying to build a life with Daniel, she had tucked the card away and forgotten about it. It was a long shot, a desperate, humiliating plea to a near stranger. But it was the only shot she had. Her hands trembled as she pulled the worn card from the bottom of her purse. The number was for a private line. Taking a deep breath that shuddered through her entire body, she dialed. An automated, impersonal voice answered. "Finch Holdings. Please state your name and purpose." "My name is Jessica Peterson," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "My father was Robert Peterson. Mr. Finch. He told me to call if I was ever in need." She expected to be dismissed to be told he was unavailable. She waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, a new voice came on the line. It was deep calm and carried an air of quiet authority. "Jessica, this is Alistair Finch. I was sorry to hear about your father. Tell me, what kind of need are we talking about?" The simple, direct question broke through her carefully constructed composure. The story came pouring out, the humiliation at the awards, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the motel rooms, the $89. She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, detached, as if she were recounting a story about someone else. The sheer act of telling someone, of admitting the totality of her failure, was both agonizing and strangely liberating. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. She braced for pity, or worse, a polite refusal. "Your father," Alistair said, finally, his voice softer now, "was the most resilient man I ever knew. He once told me you had the same core of steel in you. It seems you've just forgotten where you put it." He didn't offer charity. He offered a challenge. "I live in Seattle now," he said. "I have a guest house on my property. It's empty. You can stay there, have your baby, get back on your feet. There are no strings attached. However," he paused, "I also have a proposition. I see potential in people. It's how I made my fortune. I am willing to invest in you, Jessica. Not with a handout, but with an opportunity. I will fund your education, a new life, anything you need. In return, you will work for me. You will learn my business, and you will apply that brilliant mind your father always bragged about. You will pay me back, not with money, but with success." Jessica was stunned into silence. She had been expecting a $100 wire transfer, not a complete restructuring of her life. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because your father once did the same for me," Alistair replied simply. "He gave me a loan to start my first company when no one else would. He believed in me. I am merely settling a debt. The choice is yours. A plane ticket to Seattle will be waiting for you at LAX tomorrow morning, under your name. It's flight 732, departing at 10 a.m. Be on it or don't. Either way, I wish you well." The line clicked dead. Jessica stared at the phone, the offer hanging in the stale air of the room. It was terrifying. Seattle, a new city, a new life, a debt to be repaid through success she couldn't even imagine. But it was also a hand reaching down into the abyss she was drowning in. It was a lifeline. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the city lights, feeling the gentle rhythmic movements of her son. For the first time in months, the future was not a black, terrifying void. It was a question mark. It was a chance. The next morning, with a resolve that felt foreign and new, she used her last $89 to take a taxi to the airport. She had no luggage, only the clothes on her back, and the small purse containing Alistair Finch's business card. As she walked through the terminal, she felt the weight of her old life, the shame and the heartbreak begin to recede, replaced by a tiny, fragile spark. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, something colder. It was determination. She was not just going to survive. She was going to build an empire on the ashes of her old life. Daniel Carter thought he had destroyed her. He had no idea he had just forged a weapon. The guest house on Alistair Finch's estate was larger and more luxurious than any home Jessica had ever lived in. Nestled among towering pine trees on the shore of Lake Washington, it was a sanctuary of glass and cedar, a world away from the grime and despair of her Los Angeles boarding house. Alistair, a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor, greeted her with a simple nod. He was not a man for effusive sentiment. His currency was action, not words. "The house is yours for as long as you need it," he'd said, handing her a key. "There's a car in the garage, a credit card for expenses on the kitchen counter. Your new life starts now. Don't waste it." 2 months later, Noah Peterson was born. Holding her son for the first time, Jessica felt the last remnants of the broken woman she had been sloughed away. This tiny, perfect human was her why. He was the reason for every sacrifice, every late night, every challenge she was about to face. Her love for him was fierce and absolute, a protective fire that burned away her self-pity and forged it into pure, unadulterated ambition. Alistair was true to his word. He was a mentor, not a benefactor. While nannies he provided cared for Noah during the day, Jessica was thrown into the deep end of the world of finance and technology. Her days were a grueling regimen of study and application. She enrolled in an accelerated MBA program at the University of Washington, her nights spent devouring textbooks on market analysis, venture capital, and corporate strategy. Alistair would meet with her every evening. He didn't lecture, he challenged. He'd slide a company's financial portfolio across the table and say, "Find the weakness." He'd give her a startup's business plan and command, "Tell me why it will fail in 6 months." He was ruthless, dismantling her arguments, forcing her to think critically, to see the world not as it was, but as a complex system of assets, liabilities, and opportunities. She absorbed it all like a sponge. The part of her brain that had once meticulously organized Daniel's scripts and schedules now learned to deconstruct balance sheets and forecast market trends. She discovered she had a natural, intuitive grasp of the tech world, an ability to see the potential in fledgling ideas that others dismissed. The years passed in a whirlwind of hard work. Jessica's transformation was profound. The soft, accommodating woman who had lived in her husband's shadow was gone. In her place was a sharp, focused executive. She cut her hair into a severe, stylish bob. Her wardrobe of soft dresses was replaced by tailored power suits and elegant, understated pieces. Her voice, once gentle and hesitant, became calm, confident, and precise. She learned that in the world of high-stakes business, emotion was a liability, and results were the only language that mattered. She graduated at the top of her class. Alistair immediately put her to work, not as an employee, but as a partner. He gave her a seed fund to manage a trial by fire. Her first major investment was in a small, struggling biotech firm working on revolutionary gene sequencing technology. Everyone else saw a money pit. Jessica saw the future. She restructured their business plan, secured new patents, and within 2 years the company was acquired by a pharmaceutical giant for a staggering sum. That success was the first of many. She had a golden touch, an almost preternatural ability to identify and nurture potential. She founded her own venture capital firm under the umbrella of Finch Holdings, which she named Phoenix Innovations. The symbolism was not lost on her. She was rising from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than before. Throughout it all, Noah was her center. She was a fiercely devoted mother. Her evenings and weekends were sacrosanct, dedicated entirely to him. They built forts in the living room, sailed on the lake, and read books before bed. He was a bright, happy child, oblivious to the circumstances of his birth and the demons that drove his mother. He knew nothing of Daniel Carter. To him, Alistair, whom he called Grandpa Finch, was the only grandfather figure he'd ever had. Jessica never looked back. She never checked Daniel's social media, never watched his movies. He was a ghost, a painful memory she had locked away in a deep, cold vault. She channeled all the pain and betrayal from that night into her work, using it as fuel. Revenge was a dish best served cold, but she wasn't interested in a simple meal. She was preparing a banquet. By the time Noah was 7 years old, Jessica Peterson was no longer just a success story. She was a force. The tech and finance journals called her the Phoenix, a mysterious and brilliant investor who had come out of nowhere to dominate the Seattle venture capital scene. Her net worth was in the hundreds of millions and climbing rapidly. She had become a billionaire on paper thanks to her diverse and wildly successful portfolio. She had built her empire brick by painful brick. One rainy Tuesday morning, while reviewing a list of potential investment opportunities in the entertainment technology sector, a name caught her eye. Aura Studios, a new production company seeking a massive $50 million capital injection to launch a groundbreaking virtual reality streaming platform. She felt a jolt, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. She instructed her assistant to pull the full dossier on the company. An hour later, the file was on her desk. She opened it, her expression unreadable. The founders of Aura Studios were listed on the first page. CEO Daniel Carter, Chief Creative Officer Tiffany Monroe. A slow, cold smile touched Jessica's lips. The ghost was back, and he was knocking on her door begging for money. For 7 years she had been forging her armor and sharpening her sword. She hadn't gone looking for the dragon. The dragon, arrogant and desperate, had come stumbling into her lair. The hunt was about to begin. The dossier on Aura Studios was a story of slow, predictable decline. After the initial success of Echoes of a City, Daniel Carter's career had fizzled. His follow-up film was a critical and commercial flop. His genius was revealed to be a one-hit wonder, propped up by a script he'd been polishing for years. He and Tiffany had become B-list celebrities, famous more for their lavish spending and red carpet appearances than for their actual work. They had burned through Daniel's movie money at an astonishing rate. Aura Studios was their last-ditch effort to reclaim relevance and solvency. The idea itself, a VR streaming platform for immersive cinematic experiences, was ambitious, but flawed. Jessica's team had already analyzed and passed on a dozen similar, better-executed proposals. Daniel's business plan was a mess of inflated projections, vague technical specs, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the market. It was a house of cards built on ego and desperation. Jessica spent the next week orchestrating a meticulous, multi-pronged intelligence operation. This wasn't just about business, it was about understanding the enemy. She tasked her firm's top analysts, people who owed their careers to her, with a special project. I want to know everything about Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe. She instructed her head of research, a sharp man named David Chen. "Their financials, personal and corporate. I want to know every debt they hold, every loan they've taken, every credit card that's maxed out. I want to know the real value of their assets, not the inflated numbers in this proposal. I want to know who they've pitched to before us and why they were rejected. I want to know their vulnerabilities. Everything. Discreetly." The information flowed in, painting a grim picture for the golden couple. They were leveraged to the hilt. Their Hollywood mansion was mortgaged with 2 separate loans. They had borrowed money from friends who were now avoiding their calls. The $50 million investment wasn't just for the company. It was a lifeline to keep their entire glittering facade from collapsing. They hadn't been rejected by other VC firms. They hadn't even gotten a meeting. Phoenix Innovations, with its reputation for backing high-risk, high-reward tech ventures, was their first real hope. And they had no idea who was behind it. Jessica worked with the quiet, chilling precision of a master strategist. She had her legal team draft a preliminary term sheet 1 that was deliberately aggressive. It offered the capital they needed, but it demanded a controlling interest in the company, 60% of the voting shares. It included clauses that would give Phoenix Innovations the power to replace the CEO and CCO if performance milestones weren't met within the first year. It was a predator's contract designed to look like a rescue. Her second move was to control the environment. The meeting would not be in the sleek, impersonal boardroom at Phoenix headquarters. That was too formal. She wanted something that felt more intimate, more disarming. Alistair still owned a boutique investment firm in a historic downtown building, a place with old-world charm, rich mahogany leather chairs, a view of the bay. He rarely used the main conference room. It would be perfect. It had an air of old money and unshakable power. Finally, she prepared herself. For 7 years, she had avoided seeing his face. Now she studied recent photos of him. The charismatic charm was still there, but it was thinner now, strained. There were faint lines of worry around his eyes, a tightness in his smile that wasn't there before. Tiffany looked harder, her beauty maintained by expensive treatments that couldn't quite hide the brittle anxiety beneath. They looked like people clinging to the edge of a cliff by their fingernails. On the morning of the meeting, Jessica chose her armor carefully. A charcoal grey suit by a designer so exclusive it had no label. A simple silk blouse underneath. Her only jewelry was a thin, elegant watch on her wrist, a gift from Alistair after her first billion-dollar valuation. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. Her makeup was minimal, professional, and cold. When she looked in the mirror, she saw no trace of the heartbroken girl in the emerald dress. She saw JP, the formidable head of Phoenix Innovations. Before leaving, she went into Noah's room. He was still sleeping, his dark hair tousled against the pillow. She kissed his forehead gently. He was the reason for all of this. Not revenge, justice, security, a future for him that no one could ever threaten. He was her true north, the quiet center of her storm. As she was driven downtown, she felt a strange calm settle over her. There was no fear, no anger, no fluttering nerves. There was only the cold, clear focus of a hunter closing in on her prey. She had spent 7 years building her fortress. Today, Daniel Carter would walk willingly through the front gate, blindfolded and begging for a place inside. He thought he was coming to pitch his future. He had no idea he was about to be confronted with his past, a past that was now infinitely more powerful than he could ever have imagined. The trap wasn't just set. The bait was already taken. All she had to do was spring it. The conference room was exactly as Jessica had envisioned, imposing yet intimate. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grey Seattle sky like a dark mirror. Jessica sat at the head of the table, her back to the windows, a deliberate strategic choice that would force her visitors to look into the light, slightly squinting, placing them at an immediate disadvantage. Her team, David Chen, and two of her top legal advisors sat silently to her side, their postures relaxed but alert. Right on time, the frosted glass door opened. A receptionist showed Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe in. Jessica's first impression was that they looked smaller in person than they did in photographs. Daniel wore a suit that was trying too hard to be expensive, its sheen a little too bright under the office lights. His smile was wide and practiced, but his eyes darted around the room, quickly assessing its wealth and power. Tiffany poured into a tight white dress, followed him like a shadow, her own smile a brittle painted-on slash of red. They radiated an aura of desperate ambition. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Monroe," David Chen said, rising slightly. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to the two chairs at the far end of the table, directly opposite Jessica. The distance was intentional, creating a chasm of power between them. Daniel strode forward, his hand outstretched. "A pleasure to be here. We're incredibly excited about the potential for a partnership." He was looking at David, assuming him to be the senior decision-maker. Jessica remained seated, her hands steepled in front of her. She didn't offer to shake his hand. She simply watched him, her gaze cool and analytical. Her silence, and the fact that the others at the table subtly deferred to her, created a moment of awkwardness. Daniel's hand faltered and dropped to his side. His eyes finally shifted to her, the woman at the head of the table. He didn't recognize her. 7 years, a new city, a different hairstyle, the unshakable confidence of a self-made billionaire. They were the perfect disguise. To him, she was just a stern, powerful executive, the final boss he had to impress. "Let's begin," Jessica said, her voice even and devoid of any emotion. It was a voice he had never heard before. "You have 30 minutes to convince us why we should invest $50 million in a high-risk venture in an already saturated market." The cold, direct opening clearly rattled him. He had expected pleasantries, small talk. He exchanged a quick, nervous glance with Tiffany before launching into his pitch. He was a good performer. He spoke with passion, using buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and next-generation storytelling. He painted a grand vision of Aura Studios becoming the Netflix of virtual reality. Tiffany chimed in periodically, with vapid, effusive comments about artistic integrity and brand potential. Jessica listened without interruption. She didn't take notes. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. Her unwavering, silent scrutiny was more unnerving than any interruption would have been. Daniel started to sweat under the collar of his shirt. He stumbled over a few of his projected user acquisition numbers. Tiffany's smile became fixed and strained. The confidence they had walked in with was visibly crumbling under the weight of Jessica's silence. When he finally finished, the room was quiet. Daniel looked at her, expectant, a desperate hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, the formality a deliberate sting. "My team has already performed a thorough analysis of your proposal. David Chen slid a tablet across the table. "Mr. Carter, your projected revenue for year 3 is $200 million. However, based on current market penetration rates for VR hardware and the content development costs you've outlined, our models show a best-case scenario of $12 million with a net loss of no less than $30 million. He continued systematically and dispassionately to dismantle their entire business plan. He pointed out the flaws in their technology, the unrealistic marketing budget, the lack of a clear strategy for content acquisition. With each point, Daniel's face grew paler. Tiffany began fidgeting with the strap of her designer handbag. "Furthermore," David said, swiping to a new screen, "there's the matter of your corporate and personal debt." He listed their outstanding loans, the liens against their property, the maxed-out credit lines. He did it all in a flat, factual tone, but it was a public undressing of their finances. "You're not just undercapitalized," David concluded. "You're on the verge of insolvency." Daniel was speechless, his jaw slack. How could you possibly know all that? We know everything that's relevant to our investments, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, speaking for the first time since the pitch began. Her voice cut through the tense silence like a shard of ice. "We know you've been turned down by every major bank and have been unable to secure a meeting with any other VC firm of our caliber. We are, for all intents and purposes, your last resort." The room was thick with their humiliation. Tiffany looked like she was about to be sick. Daniel stared at Jessica, a mixture of fear and fury in his eyes. "So what is this?" he blustered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You bring us in here just to tear us apart." "No," Jessica said, leaning forward slightly. The movement was small, but it commanded the entire room's attention. "We brought you in here to discuss the terms of our investment." A flicker of hope ignited in Daniel's eyes. "So, you're still interested?" "We are," Jessica confirmed, "but not in your business plan. We are interested in the intellectual property and the brand name. As such, our offer comes with conditions." She nodded to her lawyer, who slid a leather-bound document across the vast expanse of the table. It stopped just in front of Daniel. "We will provide the $50 million capital injection," Jessica stated. "In return, Phoenix Innovations takes a 60% controlling interest in Aura Studios. A new board will be appointed by us. And we will be invoking our right to replace key executives." Daniel stared at her, uncomprehending. "Replace? You mean us?" "I mean you, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, her eyes boring into his. "You will be removed as CEO. Ms. Monroe, your position as Chief Creative Officer, will also be terminated." Tiffany let out a small gasp. "This is insane. The company is our vision. It's nothing without us." Jessica's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Your vision is failing. Your company is worth nothing but its debt. We are not investing in you. We are buying your assets out of bankruptcy before it happens. You will be given a small severance package and a minority share that you can't sell for 5 years. You will walk away with just enough to pay your debts and start over. That is the offer. It is the only offer you will get." Daniel looked from the contract to Jessica's face, his mind reeling. He was trapped. It was either accept this utter humiliation or face total financial ruin. But there was something else bothering him. Something about the woman across the table. The way she watched him, the cold confidence, the almost personal nature of this surgical dismantling of his life. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Why are you doing this?" This was the moment, the culmination of 7 years of pain work and planning. Jessica stood up, walking slowly around the table until she stood directly behind him, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a soft, intimate murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "You really don't remember me, do you, Daniel?" She whispered, the sound carrying an echo of a life he had long since buried. "You stood on a stage, holding a golden statue, and you thanked your muse. You laughed while your pregnant wife walked out of the room, completely destroyed." Recognition dawned in Daniel's eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His face went white as a sheet. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jessica stood up straight, her voice returning to its cool executive tone, now audible to everyone in the room. "My name," she said, letting each word land with devastating weight, "is Jessica Peterson." The name hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic, panicked beat of Daniel Carter's own heart in his ears. He stared up at the woman before him, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the powerful, ice-cold billionaire with the memory of his soft, accommodating wife. The transformation was so absolute it seemed impossible. Tiffany Monroe's reaction was more visceral. The color drained from her face, her expertly applied makeup suddenly looking like a cheap mask on a terrified mannequin. "Jessica." She breathed the name, a venomous whisper of disbelief. "It can't be." "Oh, but it is," Jessica said, her voice a silken blade. She walked back to the head of the table and sat down, a queen reclaiming her throne. The balance of power in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. "I believe the last time we saw each other you were being called a muse. How has that worked out for you?" Daniel finally found his voice, a strangled, incredulous rasp. This is a joke. This is some kind of sick joke. You did all of this. This entire company. Just for revenge." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "Revenge, Daniel. You have to be the center of the universe to think my life for the past 7 years has been about you. You were a catalyst, nothing more. You were the fire that burned down my old life. And for that, I suppose I should thank you. Because I built a much better one from the ashes." She gestured around the opulent room. "This isn't about revenge. This is about business. Your company is a failing asset, and I am acquiring it for pennies on the dollar. The fact that its founder is a man who publicly humiliated me and left me homeless while I was carrying his child is merely a serendipitous bonus." The mention of the child hit Daniel like a physical blow. "His child," he repeated numbly. In his narcissism, he had conveniently erased that detail, convincing himself over the years that it was a problem that had simply vanished, along with Jessica. "Yes, my son Noah," Jessica said, her voice hardening. "He's 7 years old now. He's brilliant and kind, and he is the sole heir to everything I have built, an empire you will have no part in." She then delivered the final, most devastating twist. She nodded to David, who tapped his tablet. A new document appeared on the large screen on the wall behind her. It was a page from a notebook filled with familiar handwriting her own. "Do you recognize this?" Jessica asked. "It's from an old journal of mine, from about 8 years ago. It's a concept I was working on, an idea for an interactive storytelling platform using emergent VR technology. An idea I discussed with you in detail on many late nights while I was supporting your art." She pointed to the screen. "You see the name I gave the project, the Aura Project. You didn't just steal my life, Daniel. You stole my idea. Your one big shot at a comeback, the vision Ms. Monroe claims, is all yours, was built on a foundation you stole from the woman you threw away." The air was sucked out of Daniel's lungs. It was true. He had found her old notebook a year after she'd left, and in his desperation, he'd taken the concept and twisted it into his own. He never dreamed she would ever be in a position to call him on it. "So you see," Jessica continued, her voice dangerously calm, "this isn't just a hostile takeover. This is a reclamation. I am taking back what is mine." Tiffany, seeing her future of wealth and fame evaporating, finally cracked. "You bitch!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You planned this. All of it. Plan." Jessica raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "No, I didn't plan for you to be foolish enough to run your careers and finances into the ground. I didn't plan for you to be arrogant enough to build a company on a stolen idea. I just built my fortress, and you came knocking at the gate. You did this to yourselves." She looked back at Daniel, who sat slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. All the charisma and arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell of a man. "The offer stands," Jessica said, her tone all business once again. "You will sign the documents. You will transfer control of the company and all its assets, including the intellectual property, which I am now legally reclaiming. You will take your severance and you will disappear. If you refuse, I will not only walk away, but I will also file a lawsuit for intellectual property theft that will bury you in legal fees for the rest of your life. I will personally see to it that every last one of your creditors is made aware of your fraudulent business practices. You will lose everything, the house, the cars, whatever is left. The choice is yours." There was no choice. It was surrender or annihilation. Tiffany shot a look of pure hatred at Daniel. This was his fault. He had led them here. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm done!" She spat, not looking at either of them. "I'm done with this. I'm done with you." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, abandoning the sinking ship. Daniel didn't even watch her go. He just stared at the contract on the table. It was his death warrant and his only salvation. His hands shaking, he reached for the pen. He didn't look at Jessica as he signed away his company, his dream, his last shred of dignity. He signed page after page, his signature, a weak, trembling scrawl. When he was finished, he pushed the document back across the table. He finally looked up at Jessica, his eyes pleading, searching for a flicker of the woman he once knew. "Jess, I'm sorry," he whispered. Jessica's expression remained unchanged, as cold and impenetrable as a glacier. "No, you're not," she said simply. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. Now get out of my boardroom." Daniel Carter walked out of that building a broken man. The crisp Seattle air felt foreign, the city's optimistic bustle a mockery of his ruin. The severance package was just enough to be an insult, a sum that would clear his immediate debts, but leave him with virtually nothing. It was a calculated move by Jessica, ensuring he couldn't afford to be a nuisance, but would never be comfortable again. His downfall was swift and total. News of the takeover of Aura Studios hit the trade papers framed as a brilliant acquisition by the reclusive powerhouse JP of Phoenix Innovations. Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe were mentioned only as the exiting founders. There was no public scandal, no dramatic expose. Jessica simply erased them from their own story, a far more elegant and cutting form of revenge. Tiffany, true to her nature, had vanished. She cleaned out their joint bank accounts and was last seen on social media in Bali with a wealthy older European. She left Daniel to face the fallout alone. He was forced to sell the mansion at a loss. The cars were repossessed. The friends who had once clamored for his attention no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah, a Hollywood cautionary tale. A few weeks later, Jessica agreed to one final meeting. He had requested it, begged for it through her lawyers. She chose a neutral location, a quiet, minimalist coffee shop overlooking the water. It was a public place, a final assertion of her control. He looked haggard. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by worn jeans and a faded jacket. He looked older than his years, the weight of his failure etched onto his face. "Why did you agree to see me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Closure," Jessica replied, stirring her tea. She felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no pity, not even the ghost of love. He was just a stranger, a footnote in her life story. And to give you this. She slid a small plain envelope across the table. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was of Noah smiling brightly at his 7th birthday party, a baseball cap on backward. He had Daniel's eyes, but Jessica's determined chin. "He's my son," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with a regret that had come 7 years too late. "He is," Jessica said, "and he will never know the man who abandoned him. He will grow up knowing only strength, integrity, and love. He will have every opportunity in the world, opportunities I earned for him. I wanted you to see what you threw away. Not me. Not the money. Him." Can I ever see him?" Daniel asked the question, laced with a pathetic desperation. "No," Jessica answered, the word calm and final. "That ship sailed a long time ago. You don't get to be a father. You had your chance, and you chose a golden statue instead. This is the last time you and I will ever speak. If you ever try to contact me or my son, I will use the full weight of my resources to crush what little you have left. Are we clear?" He could only nod, his eyes locked on the photograph of the son he would never know. Jessica stood up, placed a few bills on the table for the coffee, and walked out without a backward glance. As she stepped out into the bright afternoon, a sense of profound peace settled over her. It was finally completely over. The ghost was exorcised. The last chain to her past had been broken. Her life now was full. She was a mother, a CEO, a titan of industry. She had built an empire not for revenge, but for her son. She had transformed her greatest pain into her greatest strength. Daniel Carter hadn't destroyed her. He had liberated her. He had forced her to become the woman she was always meant to be. That evening she arrived home to find Noah and Alistair Finch in a heated game of chess in the living room. Noah, his face scrunched up in concentration, looked up as she entered. "Mum, I almost have him," he shouted with glee. Alistair looked at Jessica over the top of his reading glasses, a warm, proud smile on his face. Jessica knelt by her son, wrapping her arms around him and kissing the top of his head. He smelled of fresh air and childhood. This was her world. This was her victory. Not the boardroom, not the billions. This moment right here, she was home, strong, whole, and finally truly free. And so Jessica Peterson's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes become the catalysts for our most incredible transformations. She proved that your past does not have to define your future, and that the ultimate revenge isn't destruction, but building a life so magnificent that those who wronged you become an irrelevant footnote. Her journey from a humiliated pregnant wife to a billionaire powerhouse is a testament to the unbreakable strength of a mother's love and the fierce power of a woman who decides to reclaim her own narrative. What did you think of Jessica's incredible story of justice and rebirth? Do you believe she did the right thing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for listening.